My name's Ariel Pollack. I run our Rappaport Fair Trade initiatives. So please feel free to come up and introduce yourself to me. I'm happy to be a resource for any of you and any of your ethical sourcing needs. Fair trade isn't just about Africa. Fair trade and ethical sourcing, it's not just about Africa. And it's not just about human rights. It's also about issues of synthetics. It's also about issues of fraud, and just making sure that you're sourcing your products ethically and honestly. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. And I know Martin touched on it earlier during the breakfast, and we'll be touching on it more during this conference. But we have a lot of exciting new initiatives. Again, Martin touched a little bit earlier on the ethical pledge that we're launching today, and we'll be talking about it more. We also are launching a Rappaport Ethical Jewelry Directory, which is a fantastic online resource. You're all welcome to apply. It's a resource not just for consumers to find retailers, but also for retailers to find ethical suppliers. So feel free to check out and we have this brand new website, rappaportfairtrade.com. Feel free to check it out and to be in touch and to please ask any questions that you have. We have on our panel today some wonderful leaders in human rights and ethical sourcing. We have here Martin Rappaport, who will be moderating. We have Farai Maguwu, who runs the Center for Research and Development in Zimbabwe. We have Alan Martin, who is the Research Director of Partnership Africa-Canada. And we will have Charles Stanley, who will be joining us hopefully shortly, who's the President of Forevermark. And so everybody really is coming from a different part of the industry or just outside the industry, but has a different area of expertise. And we'll be giving sort of a brief overview of that area of expertise. And then you're all encouraged to ask questions. We have some prompts on the agenda, but just feel free to sort of discuss what's on your mind. And we'll have a great discussion here today. Thank you all for coming. I'm turn it over to Martin.
All right, thank you very much. I think what we're going to do here is kind of chill out. I want people to be able to participate and ask questions and maybe get closer. I'd like to speak less and have other people speak more. The concept here is to look at some of the issues and discuss them. Not only what is the current situation in Zimbabwe, but what we can actually do about it. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pass it right off to Farai here. Right, let us know what's going on. And, a lot of people in America sit here and talk about situations. And the African situation needs to be run by Africans, not by a bunch of American people sitting in America. So I'm delighted that Farai is with us today. And Farai, we want the perspective of what's really the African perspective of all these efforts. What do you think jewelers in America and around the world should do about the situations, and what are the solutions that you would recommend or that you would see what's going on? So let us know what's happening and let us know, your views, your take on what should be done. Mm-hmm. So you can...
Okay. Thank you, Martin. First of all, Zimbabwe is being led by a coalition government between Mr. Mugabe's party, Zimbabwe African National Union, and the Prime Minister's party, the Movement for Democratic Change. And there is a smaller political party that is a splinter group from the Prime Minister's party, which is simply called the MDC. Now, these three partners have a conflict, a very deep conflict. Zimbabwe is a deeply divided country with what other people call parallel government structures, depending which political party a particular government official belongs to. In that polarization, you have got two very distinct, critical ministries. One of the ministries is the Ministry of Mines and Mining Development, which is under the leadership of Dr. Albert Mpofu, who is a member of ZANU-PF, the party of Mr. Mugabe. We have the Finance Ministry, which is led by Honorable Tendai Biti, who is the Secretary General of the Movement for Democratic Party. These two ministries have been quarreling for the past 2 years over diamond revenues, where the Ministry of Finance is saying it is not receiving enough statistics and money which is coming from diamond revenues. And when we look at the problem, why the money is not going to Treasury, we find that there is the involvement of the Zimbabwe National Army in Marange. I mentioned in my previous speech that the Zimbabwe National Army was deployed into Marange in November 2008. They did not just go in to drive out the artisanal miners, but they became miners themselves. They got involved in nearly all the companies which are mining in Marange. Either they've got shares as individuals, current and former serving military officials, or the Zimbabwe National Army as an institution which is mining in joint venture partnership with a company called Anjin from China. Now, the continued involvement of the army has taken many twists and turns. At first, the problem was human rights violations, the killings of the people, the beatings, the torture, the rape of the people. But now, the big problem about the involvement of the military is not about human rights, even though human rights violations are still continuing, even though at a very lower rate. The biggest problem is that the army has become kind of a parallel government structure. Last week we had a conference in Harare which our organization hosted, and the Minister of Finance was there. He gave a speech in which he told the delegates that Anjin is in partnership not with the Zimbabwe Mining Development Corporation, which is the state entity given the power to oversee mining operations, but it is in partnership with the Zimbabwe National Army. He revealed that this entity has never remitted a single cent to the treasury. But Anjin is the biggest mine in Marange. It has got 8 shafts, which is literally speaking, it has got 8 mines in Marange. The smaller entities in Marange are the ones which have been remitting little profits to the treasury, but the rest, no one knows where the money is going. So that is our primary concern as Zimbabweans. Where is the money going? What role does the military has to do with mining? And if the money is not going to treasury, there are many questions which we are asking. Is it possible that the money is being used to fund Mr. Mugabe's election campaign? Mr. Mugabe has been talking about elections over and over and over again. He wants election in 2012. But the treasury is saying there's no budget for elections, there's no money for elections. But he's insisting. So some people believe it could be that the money is finding its way into the coffers of Mr. Mugabe's party. The other view is that the army, the Zimbabwe National Army, has become a parallel government in Zimbabwe. And it's having its own separate bank accounts where the money is going. And if this is happening, then there's a very big danger that elections in Zimbabwe will see the army raising to become a very strong force that will be a power broker, or the money could be used to prevent democratic change in the country, where the army will now be protecting its economic, not only economic, but in political interest as well. Then we come to the community level. Marange is not a piece of place that is in the sky. Marange, it's an area where there are tens of thousands of people that have lived in that community for the past hundreds of years. The discovery of diamonds has not been a blessing to this community, but to all intents and purposes, it has become a curse. The curse has been in the form of human rights violations, but more than that, it has also been in the form of forced displacement of families from Marange to an area where they are told to go and live. in this particular community, the companies have constructed homesteads for the people, but it is the manner in which these people were relocated that we protest. They were forced to move without consultation, without compensation, without adequate preparation in the area where they were told to go. Yeah, so this has created a lot of problems in terms of ensuring the human security, the welfare, sources of livelihood for the relocated families. Therefore, I will skip to the issue of what needs to be done. I'll go back to the issue of revenue. What we want most as Zimbabweans is revenue. We have a national budget of about $4 billion. Of the $4 billion, 600 million is expected to come from diamonds. A few weeks ago, the Minister of Mines informed the nation that they are very unlikely to meet the target of raking in 600 million in 2012. But our investigations reveal that thousands upon thousands of carats continue to be smuggled out of the country officially. And these diamonds find their way to the world markets, the United States of America included, Europe included. The Far East, it's a foregone conclusion that most of the diamonds, they find their way to China and to India. Therefore, our struggle as Zimbabwean civil society for greater transparency and accountability to ensure that every diamond coming out of Zimbabwe is properly accounted for will never be won without the support of the jewelers and the consumers. So, as I'm saying that the diamonds continue to be smuggled out of Zimbabwe and finding their way onto the world market, I think it is important for those people who receive the diamonds to exercise due diligence, to ask very well where their diamonds are coming from. I don't think it is in the best interest of the Zimbabwean people for the jewelers to buy diamonds and enrich certain individuals, strengthen the Zimbabwe National Army, which within a few months' time will plunge our country into a war zone as they fight for political power, especially in support of Mr. Mugabe's party. I therefore think at this particular juncture, Marange diamonds are not contributing to national development. Marange diamonds are not contributing to peace. They are strengthening an army that is well known for committing gross human rights violations. In 2008, Mr. Mugabe was defeated in an election. Some of you do not understand why is he still president of Zimbabwe today. I'm trying to think of the Republican candidate in 2008 who lost, Senator McCain. He lost the election and he is living peacefully as a citizen of the United States of America. But in Zimbabwe, we have got a loser who is the president and likely to continue for the foreseeable future. So the question is, how did Mr. Mugabe retain the presidency in 2008? It was through the Zimbabwe National Army. The army was deployed in every province, every district, every village, abducted hundreds of people and butchered them. Out of terror, the prime minister who had won the election, he withdrew from the presidential runoff. And he said, I won an election, not a war. So diamonds have become a new source of wealth for the Zimbabwe National Army, which is the proxy for Mr. Mugabe's ZANU-PF party. Therefore, buying our diamonds at the moment is contributing to the political and civil conflict in Zimbabwe. I therefore think jewelers can help us by staying away from Marange diamonds at the moment and calling for transparency, especially harmonization of statistics between the Ministry of Mines and the Ministry of Finance. There is need for jewelers to interrogate the diamond supply chain within Zimbabwe. We are always available to give you advice, tips on what is happening on the ground. Yeah. So I think that's what I can say for now. I don't see Marange diamonds as being clean. I don't think they will contribute to peace and development in the country. I strongly believe Mr. Mugabe is using diamond revenues to build a war chest ahead of the elections, which are scheduled to take place sometime this year or early next year. Zimbabweans, the last thing they want to hear about is an election. Worse still, an election that is going to be very contentious, where it is so clear that Mr. Mugabe is going to lose, but he is going to do everything possible to remain in power. Thank you very much, Martin. I think I can.
Alan, take it away.
Well, thanks, Martin. Thanks for inviting me here to be part of this panel. And you know, Martin, we've had many long discussions, I think, over the telephone over the years, and including around your dinner table in Jerusalem. And I'm always heartened by how you want to do the right thing, how you want to have these big picture discussions about how the diamond industry could better run itself. And it's always a pleasure to be with you. Equally so with Farai, who has shepherded me around the intricacies of Marange a couple times, 3 times or so, and really given me a lot of insights into how Zimbabwe works and the importance of this diamond revenue to the ZANU party. And I think that certainly the environment he and his civil society colleagues operate in Zimbabwe is not an easy one, and particularly with such a contested resource. So I think you've done right, Martin, by giving him this honor that you gave earlier at the breakfast. I'm not going to speak as freely off the cuff as Farai, because he's a hard act to follow. But so I have a few prepared notes. But I was asked to speak really about some of the current ethical challenges facing the industry in the future of ethical diamonds. I'm happy to elaborate more about that in the question and answer period after the later on in the discussion. But I want to begin with a few words about the ethical pledge, which consumers and industry members have made, which Martin launched a few days ago. I think PAC is very happy to endorse the pledge. I think it's an important contribution towards improving industry responsibility and sourcing of precious gems. I think while it's not a panacea for all the problems of violence and criminality and illegality that you might find in the jewelry industry, I think it sends a very clear message from ethical consumers and industry members that such behavior should not and will not be tolerated. And I think for that it's very valuable. Having said that, I think that I also just want to take a few moments to sort of talk a bit about a few issues of its utility and also its limitations. I think while the pledge may be interpreted by some as being a bit like motherhood and apple pie, its biggest value, I think, in our opinion, is that it's an opportunity to isolate those that are known or suspected of trading in questionable diamonds. Those who sign it and who are later found to have breached it, I think, have a very poor defense against what they've done. But in that value, I think also lies one limitation, and I think it's voluntary. There's no third-party oversight to back up the actions of those who may have signed the pledge. And I think the logical next step is obviously to create some kind of auditing scheme to ensure that people are doing what they say they're doing. And this is something that I'm told is in the works somewhere down the road. But I think the pledge also comes at a pretty opportune time as the Kimberley process undertakes the first stab at institutional reform since it was created over a decade ago. And I think the most important discussion that is happening right now revolves around the need to redefine what is a conflict diamond. And as you know, the current definition only addresses abuses that are perpetrated by by rebels, and is silent on those committed by either state actors or private security companies. And reformists within the Kimberley process are pushing hard for a wider definition that would rectify this. So progress is slow, but I think, and it's very uncertain, but I think headway is slowly being made. And I think the most recent example of that is last month, the World Diamond Council had its annual general meeting in Vicenza, Italy, and they actually did buy into this wider definition, which I think would include all forms of systemic or organized violence in diamond producing or trading zones. I think this is very significant because not only was it the WDC buying into it, I think it was an endorsement that was given by all parts of the diamond supply chain, including, most crucially, every industry association and every trading center from Tel Aviv to Surat to Antwerp, and I think that's very significant. I think the next step is to obviously convince the rest of the Kimberley process, which is no small feat, because everything is done by consensus, and progress might be very slow. But I think with the change in times, I think also comes a change in societal expectations and demands. And I think just as a company can't forever operate forever according to the same business model it had when it started, I think neither can the KP believe that the world and the challenges it faces are as they were in the late 1990s when they first started. So I think times and circumstances have changed, and so too will the KP. And I think in our view, change is inevitable. It's unstoppable. And there's a lot of things to criticize about the Kimberley process, and please don't try and start me going on that, because I'll probably never stop. But I think that one of the things that we've taken away from Zimbabwe is more about how it can be a lesson, not to revisit all the issues, but how we can actually use those examples of things that happened in Zimbabwe to actually create a better Kimberley process. And so I think the choice really for people is that I think there's a recognition by most people that the status quo can't hold. And I think the choice really for the Kimberley process now is it can either shape up or conceal its own irrelevancy. And I think it has to ask the question about whether does it really want to be the first word on conflict diamonds or not. So, if I may, there's just, with a few exceptions, I think there's a tendency by the diamond industry to be a very inwardly thinking group, I think, to claim exceptionality, to respond conservatively to change, or to calls for greater public accountability. And I think this is particularly true for the middle of the supply chain. But I'll give you an example. I mean, in January, some members of the Kimberley Process Civil Society Coalition sat down with leading representatives of the WDC and the Kimberley Process Chair in Washington. And somebody in the audience, it was an industry member, asked what interactions the assembled crowd had with other multi-stakeholder initiatives, like the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, EITI. And with the exception of the mining houses, she was met with blank stares. Now, I don't raise this to sort of cast blame. I only say it to highlight that there's a raft of issues that are circling the diamond industry right now that can't be ignored for much longer. And I think the most pressing one, and one which Farai just nailed, is the issue of revenue transparency. The public disclosure of what monies on a project-by-project basis are exchanged between governments and mining companies. And this even could be extended to people who buy directly from, in the case of Zimbabwe, from the state Diamond Control Board. This is what EITI does. And it's not perfect, but it's made great strides in shining a light into very opaque dealings in resource-rich countries and into tackling corruption. And I think the next step of this, or the next logical step to this, and it's already beginning, is how governments account for these revenues. Essentially, how do they spend them? And if EITI tells us what a country received, the next question people want to know is how and whether those revenues went to the public good. I.e., did they pay for roads, schools, healthcare, or did they go into the pockets of a few connected individuals? And I think another issue is this issue of what taxes companies pay, and demands that such payments are publicly disclosed. The good example that Farai referenced about Anjin not paying a cent, despite making about 78 million or 72 million since January. These are revenues that should be going to the Zimbabwean government. They could be actually used, but are not. And there's a good report done recently about Sierra Leone, that found that many foreign mining companies, including diamond ones, were not paying any taxes at all. They weren't contributing to the national purse, and therefore they weren't contributing to the public good. And this kind of imbalanced relationship with African countries is no longer sustainable. Foreign companies, whether they're North American, Indian, or Chinese, cannot opt out of their civic duties or think that they deserve treatment that they don't get in their home countries. And we all have to pay taxes as individuals. I don't see why companies think that they have to be treated differently. And I think that for many African countries with small or very weak tax bases, this is of critical importance. Taxes are very unsexy, I know, but I mean, they pay for things. And if managed right, they can actually lessen a country's dependency on outsiders. And there's a final issue, again, another one that Farai has already referenced, which is beneficiation. Artisanal miners and local communities want to get a share of these diamond revenues. And they don't want to see it going into their pockets of connected elites, usually with military connections. And I know next week in Washington there's going to be a conference after the Kimberley Process Intercessional where it's going to address this very issue about how to actually use diamonds for development purposes. But I think in places like Morange, I think these are the issues, the most pressing issues that are facing companies and governments involved. And now I can see, many of you thinking, what do the finer points and boring points of taxation and revenue transparency have to do with you, and why should you care? And I think the answer I would give is it's a very simple one. I think by creating a level, more open, transparent playing field in faraway Africa, it actually benefits everybody. It makes for a better and more secure investment climate for everybody, for mining companies and those that source African diamonds. And it diminishes the prospects of the diamonds that you trade or manufacture are tainted by violence or corruption. But most importantly, it reduces the bad PR for the entire industry. And I think that's something that will build confidence in the product you sell. And just as these new issues are emerging, so too are there other initiatives that the diamond industry will have to connect to, or contend with. And I think for the last decade, the KP has been the only game in town. And I think this is changing quite radically. There are efforts underway right now to integrate diamonds into, to make the KP more complementary to these other conflict mineral schemes, such as the OECD due diligence for conflict-affected minerals, the Dodd-Frank Act, which I'm sure you all are aware of, or a certification scheme created by the International Conference in the Great Lakes region, which is the area, 11 countries that surround the Democratic Republic of Congo. All of these initiatives initially gave diamonds a pass because they thought that the KP had that under control. But I think as it's become clear that the KP is no longer the first word or the only word on dodgy diamonds, I think there's been a shift to greater integration with these initiatives. There's certainly going to be a push for Dodd-Frank and similar legislation that's underway in Europe, which it's been designed in Europe to be expanded to include diamonds. The ball has already started with the OECD on due diligence guidance for diamonds, similar to that has been done for gold and coltan and tin and a bunch of other ones that usually end up in tech toys. And I think once operational, the ICGLR certification scheme will also face pressure to look beyond its 4 minerals to include diamonds. And of course, there's also the Responsible Jewelry Council's efforts to create a chain of custody. I know Martin and some others maybe in this room have reservations about some of the details of it, but I think it's the best thing on the market right now. And I think in terms of giving people demonstrable guarantees, i.e. third-party auditing, that a company acts as it says it does. And I have to make a caveat here. I think that it's, with the exception of the OECD and the RJC, most of these initiatives are not on the immediate horizon. And I think, what does this mean for the diamond industry? Now, I know that this is the old joke about the diamond industry that goes, what constitutes long-term thinking for the diamond industry? And the answer is, what's for lunch? So I recognize that, but I think that it's, some people might say, well, this is a few years off, we don't have to do anything, but I would argue differently. It might well be some of these things are 2 or 5 years away to be fully operational and ready to actually have some kind of impact on the diamond industry. And I might give you some breathing space, but I think that people like Dodd-Frank right now, it's in a bit of a holding pattern. The SEC is trying to figure out its rules. And I think when the rules eventually do come, it's going to be baby steps of the first few years. making it very unlikely that diamonds or other questionable regions will be added in the short term. I think the same thing goes for the ICGLR, where the certification mechanism is still working out a few of its bugs. But the recommendation I give to you is to start planning now to engage in these processes in a constructive way, because I think a cleanly run, transparent diamond industry is in everyone's benefit throughout the entire supply chain. And I think engaging in it now allows industry to manage the change rather than having being run over by a freight train when all these initiatives actually do come on stream in the coming years. Thanks.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you very much. Let me say that I'm a big believer in freight trains. I believe that, first of all the initiatives are good. And I think the RJC initiative is good, and all those efforts, because it's a process. And it has to be a process driven by a certain amount of consensus, and everyone has to try to do the right thing. And some right things work easier, some right things work this way, that way, but essentially, I think that everything that is done to encourage and to enlighten and to make it possible for the ethical purchase of materials is vital and should be supported and should be good. And that's the first point. Just, whatever you like, whatever flavor of ice cream you like is fine as long as you're having some ice cream. Now, the way in which that I perceive things is a bit different, because I guess Adam Smith would define me as an animal of the marketplace. And I look at the world and I see business, I see markets, I see supply and demand, I see economic motivation for change. We might want to consider that Sierra Leone once had a more robust economy than China. And you say, well, what happened? Well, it wasn't government regulations that changed it. Although government regulations in China, as tyrannical as the country was or is, it created an environment, an enabling environment for business to do the change. Jobs. You go to Sierra Leone, you talk to jobs. You talk to what's happening out there, and I know that the money is very important to create change, but it's all about jobs. It's about people being able to find their economic benefits. And so how can we change the world? Well, we can have regulations in places like countries, and I would like to also extend the conversation to human rights in places like Congo, by the way, okay? But before we define what's bad with the world, how can we change it? And I think that the focus of today should be some of the discussion. How do we actually affect change? Now, I know that with changes in Africa, for example, we had situations where the government passes certain regulations after a tremendous amount of work with the governments in America and Britain, and then get to change the laws. But again, in Sierra Leone, what is it? 26% of the children die before the age of 5. So, I mean, what would you do to keep your child alive? What wouldn't you do to keep your child alive? And if you need medicine for your kid, don't talk to me about some regulation about smuggling. It's meaningless. It doesn't mean anything. In other words, and even elections, which amazingly, it's not just the resource curse, maybe it's the elections curse, okay? But we all assume that democracy is the best solution. I say democracy is the best, the worst form of government except for all others, and I certainly believe in that. But these normal Western solutions to African problems or other problems, to me, seem absurd. They don't make any sense. So what does make sense? The thing that runs Africa and the evil people and the good people is the almighty, I wouldn't just say dollar, but the almighty money. It says in the American currency, in God we trust. And it's a funny appeal to religion in terms of currency, but money talks in Sierra Leone, money talks in Zimbabwe, money talks throughout Africa. Rules don't talk, laws don't talk, governments don't talk, money talks. Now, unfortunately or fortunately, the jewelers have the money. Actually, your customers have the money, which is why we're doing the ethical pledge to the consumers as well. But you have the money to change the world. And you can make the world better, you can make the world, we, not just you, can make the world better or worse. So what happens is, when money is applied in the correct manner, things change. That's how China grew. China grew because, a bunch of stores, Walmart, whoever said, we're going to buy diamonds, we're going to buy jewelry, we're going to buy toys, clothes, sneakers, Nikes, whatever it is, in these countries. And that created employment, which created sustainable economic activity, which created prosperity, which created the whole shebang. So how can we bring prosperity to Africa? I think that's the underlying desire here, okay? Obviously, if you bring in good, you displace evil. If people are making a living, they're voting, they're expressing their views, they're able to assert their sense of political or whatever other things that they have, if they are in fact on the map. So what's my view on this? We need to create demand, what jewelers can do to change the world. Because what are you going to know? The supply chain is a good idea if we can enforce it, but it's not easy to enforce the supply chain without any money. And when you talk to the leading jewelers of the world, they don't want this. With all due respect to all the mealy-mouthed stuff, they don't want to go out and spend money now, and they'll do, the RJC has done a great job, don't get me wrong, but they don't really want to have showcases for fair trade, ethical products, other showcases for regular products. People start saying, well, if this is good and this isn't so good, then what are you doing to me? There's a lot of resistance to change, in my view. I may be wrong on this. But what we need to do is to create demand for ethical products, straight and simple. And we need to have competition. And a consumer has to be educated to know that they can buy a product which is an ethical product, and the consumer should walk into a jewelry shop and say, I would like to buy an ethical product. And if it's not available, then the owner of the shop, the salesman, should see the back of the head of the consumer as they walk across the street to another jeweler who does have an ethical product. What I'm saying is that competition and market forces work. In my view of one of the, and it's not the only solution, and I'm not knocking what anybody else is doing, but what we would like to see at Rappaport is we would like to see ethical competition driving a marketplace so that jewelers would have a product that they say, I have a product that's better than his product. Why is my product better? Well, it could be a nice cut diamond, not because of the cut necessarily, because it's an ethical product with a defined source. And I'm not asking any jewelers to do me any favors. I'm saying to you, I'm going to steal your customers, straight and simple. I'm going to go after your customers, I'm going to make them not buy in your shop, and I'm going to make them buy in my shop because I got a better product. And that kind of a animal instinct marketplace competition, in my view, that's what drives change. It's the almighty dollar, it's the almighty economic incentive. And I think also that when a jeweler wakes up in the morning and he's thinking about the world, he's not thinking about African human rights. He's thinking about how can I make another buck? And if you can align ethical sourcing with that, then we have a home run. Then everybody wins. The consumer wins. They get something that they can proudly say, look at me, I got a better product than that girl because my diamond is an ethical diamond or whatever have you. So that's one point. The other thing I wanted to point out about the ethical pledge, and I really appreciate the support here from Alan and from Farai about this idea, and it's really, I'm not necessarily, what I'm concerned about are all the don't ask, don't tell people. Most of the people in the jewelry industry are really honest. But they'd rather not talk about this problem. They'd rather not bring it up. The purpose of the ethical pledge is to push it into their face so a consumer is going to come, a sorority girl is going to come, and they're going to say, please give me a written statement, sir, that you have investigated your supply chain and you've asked the question. And now the jeweler has to ask the question, and he's an honest guy. Now, the liars and cheaters, they're going to be out there. But my biggest concern today are the honest people who don't ask the question. And my goal, our goal with the ethical pledge is to take the honest jeweler and say, well, gosh, I have to write this to this customer, this sorority girl, and they want me to say this in writing. You know what a dilemma that makes for the chains? To have a statement to a consumer that they have actually investigated their supply chain. The legal department is going to go crazy. And then jewelers are going to say, well, if he hasn't signed the pledge, I'm going to buy from the jeweler that has. So what we're trying to do over here is not just police the negative, but push in a strong force of positive among the good people. Laws are not written so much for bad people as to define the good people. And I believe that the jewelry industry has so many good people, so many, they'll never lie. They may not tell you an issue if you don't ask, but they won't lie. And what the ethical pledge forces them to do is to get off the middle ground and to make an affirmative statement that they've investigated. And it's consciousness raising, and it's if you're an honest person, like you could take an honest company who deals in merengue diamonds in India because it's not illegal to do so, and they can't sign the pledge. So they have a problem. And they don't know what to do with themselves. They don't know where to sit because they want to feel they're good people. So I'm trying to just kind of stick in the throat of the diamond industry like a chicken bone, okay? And get people to cough or to relate to the issue instead of don't ask and don't tell.
Well, I mean, just to this issue about what should motivate people to do the right thing, Yeah, I see your point as a businessman that you want to be driven by the fact that you can make more money, you have value added to your product if it has a Rappaport ethical pledge or RBC or whatever is out there. But I mean, I would argue that I think that, should ethical companies be motivated by consumer demand, or they should be motivated by the fact that it's the right thing to do? And I think that if you're looking at something like, one of the issues, about how to pressure India and China, where we absolutely know, or Dubai, where we know these diamonds are going. A gentleman in the breakfast meeting asked this question about leveraging the retail power of the U.S. on China, because if you go to China and you have a lot of these discussions, they will be motivated by the more immediate interest of them, and that's just to I have people to employ, I want to make money, full steam ahead. And I think that what you have to do is you have to give them an incentive that they essentially are going to be flooding their market with diamonds that nobody wants to buy. And maybe that's the economic argument you're talking about. But I'm saying I think this is, if you're looking at ways of making India particularly care about this, they have to be showed or helped to see the economic impacts of not doing the right thing.
Yeah, I think, look, you have the advocacy approach that was very successful. What was it, Victoria's Dirty Secret, for example, where they talked about all the timber that was cut for the Victoria's 100 million catalogs a year. And they had the bad fish store, the fish fight, or whatever have you. And I'm not against advocacy work that is going to make consumers sensitized and not buy certain products. But it does leave us with another challenge, which is, and I think it's cool, but I see it happening I've been doing this for 13, 14 years now, going to Sierra Leone, watching what's happening. And I'm thinking that unless there's a positive approach, an alternative, jewelers are not going to shut down their stores because they're buying goods from unknown sources. Women are not going to stop buying jewelry because of some campaigns. It may affect some people. It certainly won't have an impact on China and India, because the Indian and Chinese consumer, until you get to them and explain to them the differences in the Kimberley process and human rights, and then the problems with the military, and it's just not going to happen. But what will happen is if we create a product differentiation amount. Look at the GI certificate. You can't buy an FEVS one today without a certificate. GI, AGS, IGI. People look at you like you're crazy. You're selling me an FEVS one. You want that price, and you don't have a grading report? You got to be kidding me. So, you get to the point where certain levels of consumers who are sensitive drive higher prices. And I don't believe that people are going to do things out of altruism and in a sustainable manner. I mean, it'd be nice if they did. But even the companies today that mouth off on being socially responsible, they owe their shareholders. You talk to even a company, they have a responsibility to their shareholders to maximize profits. If Michael Kowalski, if Tiffany decided to give away 50% of their revenue because he believes the world should be a better place, he'd be fired in an instant. And so companies of this, they don't have souls. They don't have love relationships. Companies are soulless, maximizing profit entities. You expect a company to say, well, I'm in love with my customers. I really wake up in the morning and I just want to be sweet to everybody. To expect a company to have a soul, I think, is absurd. They're faking you. They dress up as Mickey Mouse, but companies are companies, and they're not people, and they don't love anybody. They have responsibility to shareholders, and they maximize profits. Now, that's why I think. Look, I'm not opposed to all efforts to make companies sing Kumbaya. I think it's wonderful, and if their managers will do that. But I know the real thing behind companies is profits, and anything that makes profits increase, the company gets behind it in a sustainable manner. And that's why what I'm saying is, by all means, do all the things you can do. And sing Kumbaya wherever you want, including Washington. But
Martin, you're
get the economic alignment going, and then you hit a home run.
Have you, I don't know how many people in the room have ever seen the movie The Corporation. Great movie where they sort of talk about how the corporation is a psychopath because it's so self-obsessed and only thinks about itself. And there's a great quote by Milton Friedman where he makes exactly the same point about how if you're thinking about CSR, corporate social responsibility, he sort of likened it to putting a woman in a bikini in front of a car. If it sold the car, that was a well-spent investment. If that woman started to cost the company money, then it was a waste of money. And so I think that's the same thing with any CSR strategy, which is a very negative.
But CSR could be good for business. I'm not saying
exactly.
CSR holds you out as part of your brand. Mickey Mouse smiles all day. You know.
But then I think
okay.
but then I think that the issue there then raises the issue that if you are doing things like this, you can have some kind of voluntary CSR things which are doing the right thing, that are good.
Yeah.
But I think then it raises the issue of needing to have actual less voluntary measures to actually make companies do the right thing because they are psychopaths.
Yeah.
And I think that's an outcome. I mean, the real world example of that is the Dodd-Frank Act. I mean, that's something where it's not voluntary, it's hard legislation. Companies are going to be forced to do something because these companies couldn't do this themselves. And I think those are really the options that I think industry of all sorts is facing.
Yeah, we support the Dodd-Frank concept. However, be aware, from the African context, the Dodd-Frank Act in Sierra Leone, where people are trying to keep their kids alive, in my view, is totally meaningless. A mining act that says you're not allowed to smuggle or pay taxes when the person is trying to keep his kid alive, okay, where there's no food, where the primary concern among the artisanal district sector is, what am I eating for dinner? This is the short term. You know what I'm saying? So I'm saying those...
Although I take exception with that, because I think there's a lot of people who made that same argument about the Dodd-Frank, the implications of the Dodd-Frank Act in DRC. Saying, look, you've got this law, it's going to have all these new responsibilities for companies. A lot of these companies are saying, well, we're just going to not source coltan from DRC. People are unemployed, blah, blah, blah. Well, at the end of the day, if you look at DRC has been a train wreck for a long time, but most importantly for the last 10 years because of a war. I think if you ask most people in DRC whether they had a choice between being unemployed, and most people, quite frankly, the amount of money that they get paid in artisanal mining is not much better than unemployment. And they had the choice between that or being raped, pillaged, murdered, as they have been for the last 10 years. 5 million people dead in the last 10 years. I think it's a pretty simple thing. I think a lot of academics have been very much supportive of this idea about giving voice to this idea that things like Dodd-Frank are bad. These are people that, like, the first time this issue was first put on the map in North America was by a lobbyist, a Washington-based lobbyist, who suddenly appeared to have compassion for artisanal miners in DRC. I don't buy it. Like, I think at the end of the day, Dodd-Frank Act is better than the alternative.
I think this is I'm for the Dodd-Frank Act because it makes a lot of sense in the American context. Because American companies who have to be compliant with the Dodd-Frank Act cannot go out there and rape or participate in other companies raping, robbing, and pillaging. So the Dodd-Frank Act is wonderful. God bless it. What I am saying is something else. The rule of law in a failed state, okay, doesn't really work. So if the assembly process governments all come to Zimbabwe and say, the biggest goal that we can do is now doesn't have much chance. It's okay to try to do that, but if buyers come in there and say, we'll pay you a higher price if you have accountability, if you have transparency, if companies like Zale, Sterling, Bornstein, this one, that one, in America say, we will pay a higher price for products if these products are part of a transparency initiative, if you wish. Just like Walmart does with fish and Home Depot does with timber, okay? Then that economic power speaks volumes. And my view is that economic power. Now, what can these jewelers do? Could they go and change the laws? Maybe, maybe not. But you know what they can do? They can convince consumers that they have a better product because it's ethical, and we can create demand for ethical. See, you got to sell everything. So if you want to sell, ethical products, you got to say to consumers, hey, let's do it. Now we have to have ethical products to sell, by the way. It has to be a supply. And you can see how we have the gentleman over here from Forevermark, thanks, welcome aboard, and he's creating a product that is monitored from A to Z, and he's saying I have a better product because of that, and he's competing in the marketplace, not in the legal legislative world. Again, I'm not against anything. All roads should lead to Rome. I am saying, though, from a practical perspective, looking at the American jeweler or the American consumer or the American supplier, let us create demand for ethical products without disturbing anything that anyone else is doing. And then we begin this process of educating consumers, and consumers walk into, my dream is that a consumer walks into the store and says, sir, do you have an ethical product with an ethical certificate? And the guy says, yes, I do. and the consumer buys it, and he feels good, and his girlfriend feels good, and, or she buys it for him, or God knows what, and then everybody's happy. And that would be my goal over here, okay? Not to let Dodd-Frank and include diamonds and let the legislative environment go on. But all I'm saying is that we could use the tool of the marketplace to also, and in addition, and without knocking anybody else, promote a channel of distribution that then places certain rules in places like Africa. And just one last point, Nike in 2005 had a big embarrassment because they were employing child labor in Vietnam or whatever. Their sales went down 50%, their equity value went down 60%. And Nike then said, you know, it's important for us. Now, they were talking nice and paying millions of dollars in athletes, but it became important when they felt it in their pocketbook, okay? And today I can assure you that Nike spends a lot of effort ensuring that their source of supply chain is very legitimate. Not because of altruism or even because of government regulation, because they're a brand. And the trend towards brands in jewelry is set. So I think that we have the winds at our backs if we the advocacy work, the other work. I'm not asking for anything to be replacing. I'm just saying jewelers start getting involved with selling a better product, and the better product that you want to consider wanting to sell should be that. But that's the thing. So let's hear from someone who's actually doing it.
Well, firstly, I think everybody can hear me. I do apologise, Martin. I got my schedule completely wrong this morning, so I apologise for turning up late and jumping into this debate somewhat without understanding the full track of how it's gone so far. I think I do tend to agree with you, Martin, that ethical promises will hold much more value when they are driven by fundamental commercial need. And yeah, I guess if I'm really honest about what we're doing with Forevermark, we are following that need, and that need comes from ultimately the consumer. We may be at this point in time slightly ahead of the consumers, in that not every day is a consumer coming in and asking the jewelers and yourself for where their diamonds are exactly coming from. But we're pretty sure that that's something that's going to become increasingly more important in the sale of our product. And as Martin was saying, you see it in many categories, and we at De Beers have spent a lot of time researching consumers' attitudes, and we track ethical indicators over time, and it's really clear to us that there is a consistent upward trend in the conscious consumer. And by that I mean consumers interrogating at a level that they never did before the origin of where their product is coming from. And that's not just in diamonds, it's in any product. And Martin made an example about Nike. You can look at Whole Foods today and other major product categories. So with Forevermark, we felt it was important that we were ahead of this trend, because we do see that that's not going away, it'll only increase. I don't know, Martin, did you want me to go into the sort of specificity of how we in Forevermark establish that?
Yeah, people look at this, you can't really do it, you know, they're going to this and that, and I know that RJC's done some good work establishing standards, and you're ahead of there was this whole thing about diamonds, can we do it or not, but tell us, how does it work at Forevermark that you can honestly say that the product that you're selling is ethical and okay? What do you do? How do you track the diamonds?
Well, there are three things that to me that are critical in the Forevermark process, and it costs money. Let's understand that to start with. And going back to Martin's point, if it's costing you money, you've got to believe that this is something that's valuable to the consumer, and the consumer is going to pay a bit more money for it. And we believe they are. And pleased to say, with the sales so far with Forevermark, we can achieve a premium for our offer. Now, admittedly, the premium we provide within Forevermark is not just founded on the responsible sourcing claim, it's also aligned to a quality offer as well. But anyway, going back to the process, there are three elements to it. First, we identify what we will call responsible sources for diamonds. And those are basically established across three sort of fundamental areas, and we call them the business responsibilities. Is that mine operating appropriate standards to what we would call, good health and safety provisions? Are they paying their workers fairly? And then things like social responsibilities. What are they giving back to the community? How is it benefiting the overall surrounding communities? And great examples of that are the De Beers Botswana mines, where we know they've given back and supported HIV/AIDS programs, contributed to the overall health of that country. Fundamentally, it's risen the GDP there, led to great education and health programs. And then environmental. Mining is not a wholly clean business. Are there plans in place to re-establish the environment, and will there be no damage, long-term damage done to the environment? Probably actually the Canadian mines, and very much pushed indeed by the governments there lead that process. But we're constitution reconstruction claims in a lot of our mines in Southern Africa, so we look for those sorts of things as well. So that's on the supply side. So we're happy that we can identify responsible sources for diamonds. From there, we need to be able to track the diamond as it is cut and polished through the process. So we have established in Forevermark what we call the Forevermark Pipeline Integrity Standard, which is a standard that we require all our supply-side partners to conform to, and it's basically aimed at ensuring that there's absolute separation between Forevermark diamond and a non-Forevermark diamond through the process of the cutting and polishing. That's a standard that was developed by the British Standards Institute in the UK, and we audit to that standard twice yearly using a third-party body called SGS, which is a Euro watchdog body. So once the diamond has been cut and polished, and we know that it has been kept separate through that process, it can then be sent to Forevermark in Antwerp, at which point it will receive the Forevermark icon and a unique identification number, at which point actually it's now unique in and of itself through that marking process. So if you like the downstream, we now know that that's a solid, responsibly sourced diamond. But we do go a bit further because we want to ensure that that diamond is also sold through channels that we respect and will apply responsible business standards. So all our Forevermark authorised jewellers here in the US, for instance, have to sign a probity statement that says they conform to certain key business ethical standards. And I know that I see we have Borsheims in the room, and they will have had to sign that statement as part of being contracted to Forevermark.
So it's a brand. So it's an important part of your brand.
It's a critical part of the brand. We have we stand on three promises for Forevermark: that it's a beautiful, rare, and responsibly sourced diamond. So it's an equal pillar to what we offer,
roughly,
and critical pillar.
What does it cost to do this? Like a percentage, roughly?
Well, yeah. We estimate anywhere in between, say, 1 to 2%.
That's all? 2% of your cost?
1 to 2%, yeah. Okay. In order to establish that rigorous internal pipeline standard. The cost is one thing, Martin. It's the operation, organisation, and the resource, and the willingness to audit it and keep on top of it that's equally important.
So it's a corporate commitment? It's
a corporate commitment, and we obviously have people employed full-time out of London whose sole job it is to monitor our suppliers, ensure they're being compliant, working with the SGS to do the biannual audits. Also, the suppliers themselves have to nominate someone internally, and they have to conduct themselves 2 internal audits reporting to SGS on what they do.
So, a trick question. Why are you doing it?
Because, as I said, we believe it provides a valuable offer to our consumers that our consumers are looking for. They want to know that our diamond is from a responsible source and that they can trust it.
So,
And as I said, there's value in that.
just to kind of conclude a little part of this part of the discussion, there's a carrot and stick approach. Looks like De Beers is taking some carrots out there and saying, we see carrots, we want to eat carrots, we like carrots, we think customers are going to pay us more money for our carrots, okay? And then we have an NGO world that's saying, you know, you should voluntarily agree to do the ethically right thing to protect your reputation and so that you can stand up high and your board of directors feel comfortable, whatever. Basically, that you're going to do the right thing because you want to do the right thing as a company. Am I mischaracterizing this at all here?
Yeah, no,
I'm taking the NGO. So and if you don't, go ahead.
I mean, let's be honest. I mean, there's a lot of altruism in De Beers wanting to do this. We are a diamond company, and that's all we do. We mine $6 billion worth of diamonds every year, and that's a high risk profile for any business. We can't afford to have problems with diamonds. You know, ultimately, and all of you who are selling diamonds as jewelers, you know, we are ultimately a discretionary purchase. We rely on the fact that the consumers truly believe in the diamonds that they buy. And, you know, if that promise gets unhinged in any way, then economic value is eroded very, very seriously. And clearly, as De Beers, that's a huge risk for us. We can't afford that to happen. So it's vital that we have to do this, in my view. And it is why De Beers has done what it's done. And it's not just in relationship to the ethical issues of conflict diamonds. It goes across the board to other things that can unsettle consumers' belief in a discretionary purchase. It relates to, you know, is my diamond real? What enhancements has it had? So all of those things are also built into our offer.
Yeah.
Could I just ask a question? What percentage of De Beers' overall trade does the Forever Mark make or constitute? And you know, what are the sources of the diamonds? Like, which countries do you buy the diamonds from?
Well, that's, I guess, sort of 2 questions.
Yeah, two different questions. I know. I'm sneaking in 2.
Yes. Am I all right to answer that? You wanted to ask something as well, Michael. Shall I go ahead and answer this one?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Today, well, Forever Mark is young in its infancy. We launched the brand in 2008. So, to be honest, I don't actually know what exact percentage it would represent of total De Beers diamonds today. Only that it is focused as a proposition on stones that are 14 points or larger and of a higher quality. And that would represent, if you were to translate those type of profile of goods back into De Beers production, the vast majority of value, if not volume. So clearly going back to the economic issue, we are clearly through that process. Ultimately, as we continue to grow the credibility of Forever Mark, we'll be protecting, hopefully, the vast, larger majority of our value. In terms of approved sources, I guess we're not completely public about which sources are or are not approved. Clearly, all De Beers mine sources are approved. Canada, certain Southern African countries are not approved, such as Zimbabwe, even though that clearly is part of the Kimberley process. But we look at each and every source, and Sierra Leone and Ivory Coast and places like that would not be considered appropriate.
So would that include like purchasing from secondary sources other than just straight De Beers mines in Canada or Botswana?
Yes, that's true.
Sorry, the question I asked was that just whether there's a sourcing of diamonds from secondary sources other than the mines?
Non-De Beers mines.
Non-De Beers mines.
Yes, so BHP mines and RTZ mines in Canada are all approved. Alrosa mines in Russia are approved, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
But as I said, not, say, for instance, we wouldn't want to be involved with anything to do with Zimbabwe, even though, you know, there are perfectly well-run mines, say, in the RTZ mine there, but simply because of what we feel the overall political environment there would constitute a potential brand risk to Forevermark.
Okay. I'd like to just move a little bit. So we have a situation where there's good channels of distribution that are probably economically viable or sustainable in what De Beers is doing. But I do have a problem with the negative, with this. What do we do for the situation in the Congo has been described here as a train wreck. And it's probably still a train wreck, right? What advice, would you have, and Martin, would you have, not Martin, I'm Martin, Alan Martin, so it's confusing. What advice would you have about, here are these George, they want to be good guys, they wake up in the morning, they look in the mirror, and they want to smile, okay? And they know that there's these boogeymen out there called diamonds from the Congo that are coming from train wrecks. You know, practically speaking, okay, what do you think the American diamond jewelry industry should do about the Congo? About these diamonds that are out there that maybe you're saying that in Zimbabwe there are no human rights abuses, but if I understand you, Alan, there are human rights abuses taking place in the world of diamonds, right?
Sure.
Today, as we're sitting here today. What should the industry do about those evil diamonds? And I'll pass it to you, Brian. I'll pass it to you, Alan. I'll pass it to you, Charles. What do we do?
I mean, it's a problem.
Well, I think this sort of goes back to a bit of the question about the very kind of boring role which companies can play supporting institutions in a lot of these countries. I mean, if I take the example of DRC in a wider context of not just diamonds, you know, Canada is a mining monolith. I mean, 70% of any mining company in the world is listed on the Toronto Stock Exchange. A lot of these companies are ones that are small junior companies. They go off to, they're the ones that go and prospect. They find the claim. They say we've got, like, you know, tons of, you know, billions of dollars, whatever it is, under the ground here, and then they go looking for a bigger buyer. They go looking for BHP or whoever it is to buy that claim, or Barrick Gold or whoever it is, and they flip it. And a lot of these companies, if you're looking at the history of DRC, I think DRC, historically, going back to like King Leopold, has always been a source of pillage. Countries of white people who've gone there, they've sort of taken what they need, and then they leave. And I think that kind of mentality, that's what I was saying in my comments earlier, that mentality has to stop. You can't be going into places like this and just thinking that you can have relationships with certain individuals who don't have their national interest at heart. You can't just be going in there and you know, having, as is the case with Barrick Gold, where they've had problems, or in the case of DRC with Anvil Mining, which is now currently subject to a legal case in Canada about allowing its vehicles to be used by militias who then use them to torture people, drive them into the bush and shoot them. Those kinds of things, I think people have to really have a reality check about how they operate in those countries. And I think this is why things like EITI, one thing that people always say is like, well, how do we change India and China? I mean, these guys are impervious to Western lobbying, advocacy pitches, things like that. Well, I mean, EITI, if you were Anjan, for example, and Zimbabwe was a member of EITI, Anjan would have to disclose what it paid to the Zimbabwean government. So, I mean, China doesn't have to be part of the system. China can do whatever the hell it wants. But Anjan, which has a very dodgy agreement with the government of Zimbabwe, whether it's the military or whoever, would have to disclose that. They'd have to disclose how much money they paid. And if Zimbabwe wanted to have this little stamp of approval from EITI, it would have to comply. I think that's one thing that you do. I think the idea of if you're looking at Zimbabwe, the example of Zimbabwe and a lot of these other countries, you know, in Zimbabwe, a lot of these parastatals that are involved, that are running the show, that are handing out licenses, are essentially patronage dumping grounds for ZANU. So they might well approve a concession to be legitimate, as they have on numerous occasions. I mean, the most egregious example is a Dubai-based company called DMC, which when I first met Farah, I went across the border to Mozambique and I met one of the principal characters of DMC, who was running the biggest smuggling operation on the Mozambican side of the border. So essentially the KP came along and legitimized what was 2 years ago a completely illegal operation. He was running the biggest illegal operations in southern Africa. So I think that what I would argue for is if you were to do something in Zimbabwe, one of the best ways to reduce smuggling would be for people to start talking about, and again, I recognize this is something that has to be done at the national level, but this idea of removing ZMDC, the Mining Development Corporation, essentially from the equation. It doesn't even touch diamond revenues. That revenue should go first and foremost to the Treasury, so that the finance minister actually knows what he can do.
I'm a jeweler. I don't know from ZMDC. I don't know.
Yeah.
If I have talked to my supplier, should I say to him, no diamonds from the Congo?
Yeah, but look at it this way. I think if you're a person, like if you look at people who have been involved in there's a recent case of an Israeli guy who was arrested at the Harare airport. I mean, this is the guy who's buying diamonds on the sly, not with the appropriate paperwork, walking out in and out of the country without getting his passport stamped. I mean, these are kinds of things where it is about individual people who are part of the business.
I agree with you, but again,
Yeah.
I'm a jeweler in Las Vegas, where people love to buy jewelry when they win at the tables. My store is the closest store to the casino. And I came to this conference because I happen to be in Vegas, because that's where my store is. And now I went to this Rappaport Schmoozeroonie, and what I would like to know is, should I say to my supplier, no diamonds from the Congo, or not? Because I'm not going to figure out all this craziness in Africa, okay? I can say to my supplier, I will not buy from you if your diamonds are in Zimbabwe. I will not, you can have them, just don't sell them to me, because I don't know what you do.
Well,
Is this a reasonable approach for a jeweler?
I think there's ways in which I mean, there's an example of DRC, for example, where the Diamond Development Initiative, which is an offshoot of PAC, is registering artisanal miners. They went there. They with the pilot project, they were hoping to sign up 8,000. They signed up 80,000. Now, a lot of people,
they signed up 80,000 artisanal miners
in the Congo.
Thank God.
And now this is something where I think and I know there are American jewelers and Canadian jewelers who are part of this State Department funded project called PRAD, where they're trying to support artisanal miners. And I think this is one of the best ways to ensure local diggers are not only given a fairer wage for their work, but it's also about legalizing them, giving them legal rights where they can, and a system, an institution in that country where you can take an artisanal guy can take his diamond, and I know that De Beers has been very supportive of this as well. This idea of giving them a conduit where they can actually contribute more legitimately, get a better wage. That is something that jewelers could support. And they do.
So you'd say, I'm a guy here in Vegas, I say to my supplier, no diamonds to the Congo unless they come from some kind of PRAD deal.
Or, I mean, or DDI, or, I mean,
the problem is that most sourcing today is from unknown sources. And the bad stuff mixes with the good stuff.
Yeah.
So I, as a jeweler, inadvertently, undesirably, end up buying this stuff. So I don't want to do that.
But the reason why I pitch that is I think that one of the things that one of the frustrations I think we have in the coalition a lot of times when we're arguing these cases in the KP is how a lot of African countries don't actually recognize how when they support something like Zimbabwe, as they have for the last few years in the KP, they're actually undermining their own position, because people, on a good day, see Africa as being one country, not 54. And so I think they don't really differentiate between a well-run mine in Botswana or DRC or Marange. And they just sort of see it as one big kind of sea of corruption and violence. And I think this is why I think that African countries, I think, should be encouraged by retailers and by others, where there should be they should be given an economic incentive if you're looking for retailers who could promote that.
Okay. Farai, what should they do? What should the jeweler here? I think if you go to the casino, you'll see always the closest store to the casino is always a jewelry shop. It's just the way it works in Vegas, right? What should the jeweler do? You got jewelers out here, or people that sell them. What do you think? And I'm talking about the Congo now, where there are arguments, or maybe not the Congo, maybe other countries. what do you think a jeweler should actually do when he talks to his supplier?
Okay.
And what does the supplier do when they talk to their supplier? What do you think?
Okay, fine. Let me just make a reference. On my first trip to the Democratic Republic of Congo, it was last year in June, and when I arrived at Kinshasa International Airport, to my surprise, there were more cargo planes than passenger planes at the airport, which was showing the high level of extraction that was taking place in the DRC. And then you juxtapose that with the level of poverty and misery in the country. It was quite amazing. So, coming back to the question, what should the jewelers do? Most of the African governments have got very weak governance structures which cannot guarantee, normal transactions, transparency and accountability. But most of the jewelers, they are coming from countries where transparency, accountability are highly esteemed. So one thing that I think jewelers can do is to publish what they are paying to their suppliers, is to make their transactions public. I have purchased such amount of diamonds from company ABC, from the Democratic Republic of Congo. That allows the local civil society to monitor now. We now have statistics and figures as to how much the transaction was worth, where did that money go. In the case of Zimbabwe, like I said earlier on, there is a complete blackout of information. No one knows, even the Minister of Finance has to sniff for information. And when there is an auction, sometimes an auction of 4 million carats of diamonds is taken up by one buyer from Dubai. And you start to ask, was it a real auction or it was something else? So if the jewelers can make public their transactions, for instance, in 2010, when Zimbabwe was allowed by the Kimberley process to export diamonds for the first time after the embargo had been lifted, the first auction was made public. It raised about $72 million. After the first auction, there was another one which was coming in about 3 weeks. It never saw the light of day. And what was the argument of the government? Our buyers have requested anonymity. They don't want to be published. Therefore, in order to protect the identity of the buyers, we are not going to make the auction public. So, ethical jewelers will demand that whatever transaction they are going to be involved in, they should be able to make it clear, post it on a website so that local people can follow. And then there are basic questions that should be asked. Like, who have you bought the diamonds from? If you bought the diamonds from the government regulator or the ones which are allowed by law to sell the diamonds, the issue which Martin is referring to, where an Israeli dealer is bought, is caught at the Harare International Airport trying to smuggle 1,300 carats of diamonds and pieces of diamonds. What didn't come out clear? Where did he get the diamonds from? So those questions like, who are you buying them? Where are you buying your diamonds from? How are you buying those diamonds? If you are able to ask those questions, ask yourself, who, where, how did I buy the diamonds? I think you do a lot of work in promoting transparency and accountability. Thank you.
Yeah, can I just ask one?
Can I clarify what you said before? Obviously, the jeweler in Las Vegas isn't going to be able to get the information about where the supply chain, what the rough diamond there. But I think that what we can translate here is that there should be a transparency initiative. Companies that participate in the transparency initiative should be identified. And those companies should be preferred suppliers to other companies that manufacture diamonds. If there, for example, there's a a group of companies called the Transparency Group, and maybe that's an RJC issue. And if these companies are participating in a transparency initiative, you can say to the jeweler can say to their supplier, are you buying diamonds from a company that is sourcing through a transparency initiative group member or an RJC member for that point, okay? And what you do is you start to connect the dots in the supply chain. And what Farai is talking about is the dots between the government of Zimbabwe or the Congo or anyone who's selling diamonds and the buyer from the rough diamonds from the producing country, right? That's what you're referring to. And so what we would need to do, and the big problem in the diamond and jewelry industry is that the diamonds then travel through so many hands that it becomes very difficult. So what we need to do is create clusters of suppliers that belong, which is, I think, what the RJC is doing. So what you need to do is have certain standards, and maybe I guess RGC would have such a standard of transparency, and then you can say, are you sourcing through those channels? Sorry.
No, you just, a lot of what you just said is what I was going to say. I would encourage people to join the RJC. I think this is something where I know that recently in Antwerp there was maybe Michael, you can probably explain more about that. There was a group of people in the industry that have come together, trying to sort of do a group bit of education around how to do it, but also perhaps making a kind of group application. Is that right, Michael?
Not strictly speaking, Mark. That was more discussions around our own certifications.
Yes, to become certified.
About that, but the general principle would follow through.
Yeah. So perhaps, I mean, that could be something where you could perhaps offer a similar kind of thing for people in Las Vegas or anywhere really in the United States if they. I'm signing you up for something, but I think that idea about, it's still that idea about approaching the RJC to see how you could perhaps join it. But I think just to also explain a bit more about what DDI does, which I referenced earlier, I mean, one of the issues that people had was that development issues, traditional classical development issues about community beneficiation or environmental risk management or child labor or labor standards, all those kind of things were never part of the KP remit. And so I think about 5 years ago, am I right? I think they decided that instead of trying to push this issue through the KP and to actually create a standalone agency or organization which would work on those kind of development issues. So the one that they work the most on right now is this idea of registering artisanal miners, both in West Africa and in DRC. And I think those are initiatives, as I mentioned earlier, which I think gives people legal clarity, both authorities in those countries, but also the miners. They know their rights, their responsibilities, and it does actually ensure a better wage, a more secure wage for them. And I think this goes back to the issue of creating a system where you, by supporting things like DDI and PRAD, which the State Department is involved in, I think you create this kind of investment environment that I was speaking before about, which is more predictable, it's more secure, it's more stable. It's one of those things where you don't have as many surprises. There's less need for companies to worry about corruption, about violence, about criminality, and I think those are one of the main reasons why I would recommend looking at DDI, the Diamond Development Initiative. If you punch it into Google, you can find the website. But I think those are two options: RJC and DDI.
Yeah, I think that's good. We should support, in fact, people joining the RJC and maybe helping DDI. But the bigger problem is connecting the dots. You get a guy who's an RGC guy and says, I'm great and I'm wonderful, and my diamonds come from Merengue, they're legal. And what can you say? So my problem here is along the lines of, and it doesn't mean that having good dots is bad. I think it's important to have good dots. And maybe Michael, we can ask you to talk about that. How do we connect the dots over here? I know that there was an effort, and you're working on this chain of custody idea in gold and in other areas, okay? I think that once that chain of custody can be applied to diamonds or even not gold, whatever, it's a wonderful idea. Because then what will happen is that the jeweler will be able to finally lock into something that is okay throughout the distribution. But just because one piece of this is kosher, it doesn't mean that the other pieces are. Then you get into the problem of, well, you know, maybe it sounds better than it is, or maybe it's even, you know, my factory is great and my cutting factory is wonderful, which is good, which is excellent. But it doesn't mean necessarily that they're not going to make any diamonds. So the question, I guess, the challenge for us in an industry is to get the chain of command. Maybe, Michael, you may want to talk to that a little bit.
Sure, Mark. Well, we've got...
Give him a mic. You stand on the mic for like there next to you. Yeah. Because I think it's a chain of custody is wonderful. We can get
well, we're now operating the chain of custody for gold and for platinum group metals. That was launched back in March. We've now got 2 refineries, one in the US, one in Switzerland, that have been certified against that standard.
What are the refineries' names? So people...
Metalor.
What?
Metalor, both in Switzerland and here in the US. Now, they are capable of selling chain of custody certified gold to customers. On the diamond side of things, we had a pushback from significant sections of the industry toward the end of last year about the draft that we had put together over the preceding 18 months to 2 years. And we now have a subcommittee of our standards committee looking at that issue, having further consultations around what, if any, changes need to be made to the draft that currently exists. That committee is meeting and is looking to report early next year is the timetable that they have. So the issue for us now is we have proven that it is workable for gold, and we've got a lot of enthusiastic people involved in, particularly because of Dodd-Frank here in the US, publicly listed companies who don't want to be forced into the situation of having to report, as the Dodd-Frank legislation does, that in the absence of independent third-party audit of supply chain, they may have to advertise, my product, my jewellery product, may contain warlord product. This is not good for advertising. Everybody in this room would agree. So that's the reality that legislation has put upon the industry. So it has been a major driver. But I would say, in very much the support of the industry, that the RJC commenced work on chain of custody before Dodd-Frank appeared. It just happened that Dodd-Frank, when it reared its head, ugly or otherwise, through the whole Wall Street Reform Act process, we're in a better place than we might have been. So rather than having to play catch-up, a bit like Charles was saying about what De Beers has done with Forevermark, it's getting ahead of the curve. Now, likewise, we think the work that we've been doing on chain of custody for gold, precious platinum group metals, and the work we're doing on diamonds is a good positioning for the industry, because certainly, as Charles referenced, the research, the anecdotal evidence, people know from talking to their own families, concern about the provenance of goods is a rising tide. And, you know, taking up some sort of King Canute type position ain't going to save us. So the issue for us is one of a work in progress for diamonds and a functional working system for gold and platinum group metals.
Is there any added value? I mean, are people able to sell it at a higher price if they have the chain of custody?
Well, these are the sorts of questions. We had a seminar yesterday morning that we had a number of industry people. Fiona Solomon, our Director of Standards, talked about our gold thing. I think the market's yet to determine that. I don't doubt the refiners are probably keen to get a premium, as much as Charles was saying. The issue of there's work in this. This is not a labour-free, cost-free device. The issue may well be that as more and more people take this up, we may see a transformation of the industry, that this happens to be the way this material is sold into the future. At the moment, we have a novelty value. And I don't mean that in any way harshly. It's the novelty of the small numbers, relatively, of diamonds that are coming through with things like Forevermark, Canada Mark, etc. The small volumes of gold that are currently now certified under the RJC chain of custody system. Certainly, I think, again, echoing Charles's comments, as more and more people start to ask about the provenance of the goods and the services they're buying, that will become the norm rather than, as we see it at the moment, the exception.
Is there any way to differentiate a product? What can a jeweler say to their supplier about an RJC product that in fact does benefit from the chain of custody versus just a regular RJC, a product from an RJC member?
Well, the important thing, I suppose, my apologies to the audience for preach on the RJC, but the issue core with us, well, the core of the issue for us, our member certification system, the original program, if you like, of RJC, is not a product label. Okay. It's about the business as you were saying in some of your comments and some of the other speakers have said.
Right.
You know, the RJC member is doing the right thing as a company. What we're doing with chain of custody is allowing for the use of that chain of custody certificate, should it be desired by the retailer. It comes back to your point, do you want to differentiate on your shelves between the certified stuff and the non-certified stuff?
Right.
It can come down to a product label. And again, we have licensing rules, et cetera, around that, such that you can't do what was the situation in Australia a few years ago, meat substitution racket. Said beef, answer to the name of Skippy the kangaroo.
Yeah.
You've got to have capacity to avoid fraud.
Okay.
But it does allow for, the chain of custody certification does allow for product labelling that talks to the specifics of what the chain of custody claim is. So if the chain of custody claim is this is recycled gold, for example, that's all the label can say. If it is more precise, and we're yet to see that happen yet in the gold industry, that, for example, this gold comes from this particular mine here in Nevada, then that's the sort of claim that can be made. But it has to be backed up by the...
So a jeweler could say, I want gold with an RJC product endorsement or something.
Well, it's more you're asking for gold that has that chain of custody certification.
Would there be a symbol or something if I bought the gold as a jeweler? Would it have a stamp or would it have a...
Yeah, you'll be able to see. Yeah, you'll be able to see the certification documentation. Again, website responsiblejewelry.com has chapter and verse as to how this works. But basically, it comes with that certification and with the capacity, again, assuming that you are part of the chain of custody program yourself, that you are then able to use that logo in your material.
I think this is a great solution. I think it's a great way to go forward, and we would look for it. Let's open it up. We're going to have to end on time, and we only have about 12 minutes, but anybody would like to say something, please step up to the mic, and let's open this up.
So you might have answered this, but so forgive me if I'm, but Farai, I wanted to ask you, you said a lot of the diamonds are being smuggled. Clearly no KP certificates going on there, but there are diamonds with KP certificates coming out. And who is the KP giving them to? The military that you say is now getting power? Or the government that clearly is not being responsible to the people? So what's the KP doing there, I guess is my question.
Okay, thank you. The KP is still, what should I say, is certifying diamonds out of Zimbabwe.
Mm-hmm.
All the mining companies, including the one which is a partnership between the Chinese and the Zimbabwe National Army, are trading their diamonds with the KP certification. So, in reality, all Zimbabwe's diamonds are KP certified. But in practice, not all of those diamonds are contributing to treasury.
Okay.
But apart from the diamonds which are being sold through the normal KP channels, we still have quite a big chunk of our diamonds which are being unofficially smuggled out of the country, evading even the KP process. The reason being that there are various interest groups within government, the army, the police, the CIO, we have got access to the diamonds. And one reason why the campaign to certify Marange diamonds was successful is because there was a common or a prevailing idea to say, if the diamonds are certified by the KP, then it means there will be improved transparency and accountability because there will be paper trail.
Right.
And those groups and clubs of people now feel that the KP certification is actually a threat to their interest. Hence, they continue to find their way of taking their chunk of diamonds and smuggling them. And we suspect the diamonds which were caught about a month ago at Harare International Airport were smuggled from the vault, and those groups had managed to get access and they were selling them out of the country.
Okay. Because as a retailer of fine jewelry, and I sell a lot of diamonds, you know, we've had this great safety net of the KP. Oh, yeah, this is conflict-free, and our customers are... And I come from a liberal part of the country, Northern California, and I don't feel confident that I can say that now. And it seems like, I mean, Charles, does your Forever Mark certificate mention the KP at all, or is it's just your certificate is this transparency, but
I mean, all forever marked diamonds are also KP compliant. It's just
Right.
that not all sources within KP are considered responsible from our standpoint. So yes, I guess what we say within our grading report is that all these diamonds have been responsibly sourced, and they are being tracked through our pipeline using the Forever Mark pipeline integrity standards, so you can be assured of their origin.
So other than buying Canadian or Forever Mark, Martin, how do we get these questions answered about transparency as a retailer with our suppliers?
I think the one thing you need to do is, first of all, you need to recognize what works and doesn't. The Kimberley process is good if there's a war and the United Nations Security Council takes a position. Other than that, the Kimberley process doesn't give you anything in terms of human rights. So if you go to your customers and say, don't worry, the Kimberley process certificate is there, then you're basically, it's just false.
Okay.
And it's good. I mean, what it is, what it is, it isn't, you know.
Right.
But
So what can you do to, listen, I mean, KP doesn't assure you anything when it has to do with human rights or the fiscus or the money being paid or whatever it is. Now,
Okay.
what does? How do you deal with this? Well, like you mentioned, Canadian diamonds, certain diamonds that you can get from certain sources that say, I can show you, or I can promise you, or I can give you a certificate that this diamond comes from this place. And you can trust, if you trust that person, okay? Well, that's a good step forward, because you talk to your sources.
Okay.
Buying diamonds from the general open market, you know, it's probably not so, you know, it's sort of, you see, the president of South Africa once said that don't worry about AIDS, you can take a shower. And he did say that. And for a while, there were a lot of people that believed you could just take a shower. Well, we know now that you just can't take a shower.
Right.
So you need to be careful about who you're sourcing with, and you need to ask them where they get their diamonds from and be very specific. Now, that means that a lot of diamonds that come from the general milieu of trading markets. I didn't take this discussion to the impact on free markets.
Right.
Because that's going to be, if someone just bought a diamond for you and said, here, I just bought it off the street, you have a problem. You have a real problem. And you also have a problem with synthetics. Maybe it's synthetic, maybe it's treated. You have a problem. So what you need to do is to ask your source, where exactly did you get this thing? And if they say, we don't know, which most of them will say,
they don't know a lot.
they're honest, congratulate them.
Okay.
Then you either have the option of explaining to your customer, I have a diamond here, it meets your requirements, it's very brilliant, and unfortunately it doesn't come from a known source. I have this other diamond, it's more expensive, it's not what you want. And then the consumer can make the decision. I think the key to the game is to be honest and transparent. Right. And the world today is not in a situation where we are able to effectively, the majority of diamonds say we know where they are. However, you can talk to somebody who's a supplier out here at the show, and you see that they're a DTC or you can ask your customers, and by the way, if you tell your customers, your suppliers, this is important to me,
right,
they will then start to dig and start. I know that Susan Jock spoke at a meeting that we had once, and she said, look, I told my suppliers, I don't want to buy Merengue diamonds. They said it's impossible. I said, no problem, I'm going to another supplier. You know, and then they said, well, maybe it is possible. So you just have to look after your customer and yourself, and it's a big problem now because it's very limited supply.
Because, you know, if you're going to write down to your customer that I've done this, and you want to give it, because I have people come in and ask.
Yeah.
Already, it's been going on for years.
But you can say to them, look, I don't know. For example, we're dealing with goods from pawn shops. And the pawn shop doesn't know. Right. I cannot guarantee you natural diamonds because there's CZ mixed in here. So we hire sorters and we separate it out. And they sell it as is. Christie's and Sotheby's will sell you things that are as is and say, I cannot promise, and I can't guarantee the provenance of this piece of jewelry. You know, they say it belonged to Queen Elizabeth, but I don't know. You know,
right.
They say it. So you just have to be honest.
Right.
And where you can, and yearn and try for
right.
things that have a provenance, that have a known source. And if you don't, just tell your customer.
And that's what we do. I mean, if it's an estate piece in particular, and we don't know. But if they really want it, we get a certificate of origin from Canada. I mean, that's where we fall back.
That's one way to do it.
But that doesn't help the African, you know, I mean, it's like, I grew up in the Midwest, and you take corn and wheat away from farmers, and that's their livelihood. So it's really good to have what you guys are doing. Is thank you. It's so wonderful, so that we can get this good thing going, like you're saying, and kind of go over the dark side and get into this.
Look, maybe the RJC thing will work together with the Pratt program.
Right.
And then they'll have these diggers, these artisanal diggers that are okayed out, and then you'll have a chain of custody, and it'll be wonderful. So
Right.
yeah, go ahead.
Thanks.
Mike.
Just to say, Martin, we've got a memorandum of understanding with DEI to do exactly that.
Great.
The last thing we wanted was the only good diamonds come from
Right.
large companies rather than writing off.
Right. So I'm saying there's things in the works, and I think that by creating demand and asking the questions, you're going to start driving suppliers to saying, well, I want to buy this Pratt RJC type diamond, and you drive demand, and the guy says, well, there's an incentive to me to buy those Pratt goods, and you start this economic wheel, turning. So.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest problems is people tend to see the Kimberley process more seriously than the KP sees itself. The issue of conflict diamonds. I should say the Kimberley process, to a large extent, appear to have outlived its existence, its usefulness. There is an intense debate within the KP right now concerning human rights. Whether the human rights debate should be within the KP or it falls outside the mandate of the Kimberley process. When in its founding document, I think in paragraph number 2, it makes it very clear that it came into existence because of civil wars which were fueled by diamonds in West Africa and the concomitant human rights abuses that took place there. But now the KP, because of the craving for diamonds and to make sure that they want to feel good that they've ended the diamond-related conflicts, no one wants to talk about human rights except civil society and a few progressive governments within the Kimberley process. So never be fooled by the KP certificates which say conflict-free. There are many graves in diamond-producing countries where diamonds are written conflict-free, but you've got families grieving over their loved ones. You've got women that are crying that they've been raped. You've got people that are maimed for life because of the diamonds which are said they are conflict-free. So if I was a jeweler and I find a diamond which is said KP certified or conflict-free, I think that would be one of the biggest reasons why I should not take that diamond. Thank you.
Okay, next question, and then this is the last question, and we're going to have to go, but
Okay. We keep talking about how the consumer will change the fair trade parameters. So, Charles, have you used the fair trade as the lead focus in the Forever Mark advertising? And Martin, I was wondering if, are you making forays into the consumer community with your message?
Charles.
I wouldn't say that we lead with the responsibly sourced message. It is certainly there in all of our marketing materials. If you were to go on the forevermark.com website, you'd see it clearly laid out there. And I think, because we got other messaging that we think is equally important about what Forever Mark's about. As I said, we actually lead mostly with, I guess, the idea that it's a very high quality, beautiful diamond. But I think the way that I guess our retailers are able to use that message is that when this becomes an issue by a consumer and they raise it, they can fall back to the fact that, yes, this diamond has been responsibly sourced, rather than lead it, which, if we're honest about it, people don't necessarily want to raise the issue if it's not there. And also, if you raise the issue, what does that say about all the other non-Forever Mark diamonds there? So we do slightly advise, and maybe to my colleagues to the right, he may not like this so much, but we don't actually advise our partners to particularly lead with this message, particularly if they have non-conflict. So if they have non-Forever Mark diamonds in their inventory, because it does potentially raise an issue about those other diamonds. Is that?
It's too bad.
Yeah,
I mean,
I think
It's
that
too bad because we're trying to change the consumer's mind as well, to ask. And if you don't bring it to their attention, they're not thinking about asking. And the 20 and 30-year-olds are starting to become a lot more aware. But, you know, how many years have you had this fair trade
We've been doing this about
panel?
8 years or so. But let me just say this. Look, most jewelers are in the business of making jewelry and selling it.
Right.
They're not crusaders. They're not NGOs. They're not advocacy experts. They want to make their money, go home, feed their family, and get a game of golf in if they can. That's the reality of the world. They're not, you know, we want to save the world kind of people. Young people are growing up to be more socially conscious. I believe, Rapport Group believes, there's a certain segment of the population that wants to buy Tootsie Rolls, and the Tootsie Roll factory sells them. There's a certain segment of the population that wants ethical products. We believe it, we see it, we smell it, and we feel it, and we intend to service it. So what are we doing? First of all, we're going to be going to everybody, consumers, suppliers, retailers. It's a bit of a problem because it doesn't help for a consumer to ask for something that doesn't exist or can't exist. But at this stage, we don't really care that much. So we're going to consumers. We're going to, first of all, establish the framework which we have. What is the pledge? And we worked with Alan to send back emails. What should the actual pledge say? And it's built on the idea that that the buyer is asking the supplier to investigate, consciousness raising. We're going to consumers for sure. We hope we'll be able to deal with some of the sororities throughout the United States of America. This becomes their campaign as well. We think some movie stars are going to support us and say, I made the pledge. You should buy from jewelers who made the pledge. Again, it's a process. It's going to take us a long time. But we are not, see, most people in the jewelry industry, so we say, look, I want to sell my product. If the problem comes up, I'll deal with it. I'm an advocacy guy. But instead of going in terms of negative advocacy, like, you know, Victoria's dirty secret, I'm saying Victoria's clean lingerie, you know? So what I'm coming out there and saying to people, okay, let's get this thing out there for jewelers who have a conscience and a soul. Because jewelers say, I want clean stuff, irrespective if there's customers. They want to look in the mirror in the morning. They're consumers that feel that way. So we're going to do consciousness raising through the pledge. It's very reasonable for a consumer to say, I'm only going to buy from companies that have the pledge. So you have big companies or large board of directors, they get 1,000 letters or 10,000 letters for a bunch of sorority girls throughout the country, and the board of directors will tell their guy, listen, you Mr. CEO, sign the damn pledge, because if not, it makes us look bad. So will that happen tomorrow? No. Will that happen over time? Definitely, I believe so. So as the wave approaches of consumer awareness, we're going to capture that energy and try and direct it into this pledge idea, which then forces companies who are honest to make the pledge, which means they got to talk to the legal department, which means they got to talk to their suppliers, which means they got to go to RJC suppliers or something, and they got to tighten the screws in their game plan. Jewelers will go to suppliers and say, hey, you didn't sign the pledge, Mr. Supplier. And they'll say, well, you know, I'll see, I don't know. You know, and then they'll press her. So the idea that I'm looking at is grassroots, bottom up, waves of change. Maybe we go viral, maybe we don't. I don't know. But ultimately, it's going to depend on whether or not there are consumers who really care, whether there are jewelers who really care. And we're willing to bet that there's some segment of the population that really cares. They'll ask the question. And when they ask the question, it's going to put the supplier on the spot. And if the supplier doesn't feel comfortable, that's exactly what the Rapport brand does. It makes people feel uncomfortable sometimes. So the supplier is going to say, what do I do now? This consumer's asking me. I can't lie. I have to ask. I have to start digging. So I'm hoping that that will take place. And things will change slowly. So it's an effort. It's not going to solve all the problems. RJC, I think, is great, what they're doing, and the advocacy work you're doing. To even the Kimberley process, which I worry about is false advertising, it's still, if there is a war, God forbid, and the United Nations Security Council does get off their butt, which is unlikely, but like they did in the case of Liberia, then the Kimberley process can also play a role. So I'm not against anything. I'm for the idea of an ethical supply chain that people can beg and ask for and push and promote. So I think that's the bottom line. We're going to have to run here.
Thank you very much.
I'd like to take a picture here. Sorry. With that really short question, okay, but we really got to go.
I just wanted to mention that the Diamond Development Initiative has a booth. It's in the lobby on the first floor, L16, and it has just released a set of draft development diamond standards that could one day lead to a development diamond that jewelers could buy.
We've got the email address of pretty much everybody here. And by the way, for DDR, JC, if you want to send a message, we'll email it out to everybody. And so that'd be really cool to follow up. We want to get a picture here. And by the way, if everybody wants to get into a picture, my photography guy, do you think we can get everybody together somehow? If anybody wants to be in a picture, you can say you were here when. Kind of stand in front of the table over here. Let's all get a picture of us together so we can have a memento. Okay? Yeah. Sure. Yeah, hi, Joe. Come on, come together, come together. We got to move quickly here. Let's stand with our photographer.